Will never forget the day my brother walked into the hospital room. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, the moment I cradled my newborn son for the first time, a beautiful boy I had waited for so long, the air smelled of antiseptic mixed with the faint scent of baby lotion. It should have been a moment full of happiness, surrounded by the people I loved. But as soon as my brother opened his mouth, everything shattered. I wonder where the dad is, he said, laughing. This is going to be good. He didn't know that my husband had died just 4 months ago. He didn't know the truth about the pain I had been hiding or how the past months had been a whirlwind of grief, tears, and loneliness. No, all he saw was an opportunity to mock me once again. My brother had always been like this, always the one to tear me down, always the one to get his laugh at my expense. But this time he had no idea what was coming. As he stood there laughing about my baby being another statistic, I locked eyes with my father-in-law, a man who had never shown any emotion before, but there was something in his eyes now, a storm of rage. He had been standing behind my brother unnoticed, but his presence was undeniable. I gave him a signal, a silent warning, and just like that, everything started to unravel. Let me take you back a little back to before all of this, back to when we were a perfect family, or at least that's what it seemed like to outsiders. Growing up, I always believed that my brother and I were close. We fought like typical siblings, of course, but there was love there, the kind of love that people expected from a family. But as I got older, I began to see the cracks, the moments where the facade slipped. My brother wasn't the protective, loving sibling I thought he was. He was, in fact, always waiting for the next opportunity to tear me down. My parents, especially my mother, were blind to it. She always defended him. To her, he could do no wrong. I think she wanted to believe that we were the family she had always dreamed of, one where everyone got along, where no one had secrets, where nothing was ever messy. But that wasn't the case, not for me, not for him. First real crack came when I was about 12. I still remember the way my brother pushed me into a puddle during a rainstorm, laughing as I stood there soaked and humiliated. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't playful sibling revelry. He wanted to hurt me and he found joy in it, but it wasn't just the puddle. It was the way he constantly made fun of me, belittled me, pushed me down so he could feel better about himself. He loved to see me squirm. My parents didn't know, or maybe they didn't want to know. My mother brushed it off, saying, "It's just what brothers do." She never intervened, never stopped him, and my father, well, he was always so busy. Too busy to notice the way his son treated his daughter, so I learned to keep quiet about it. I learned to hide my pain because every time I tried to speak up, it was brushed off. But I didn't just take it silently. Oh no, over the years, I developed a defense mechanism. Tough exterior, a silence that spoke louder than words, and I used it to push people away, especially him. I cut him out of my life years ago. The verbal abuse, the emotional manipulation, it was enough. I couldn't take it anymore. And then came the pregnancy. The moment I found out I was pregnant with my late husband's child, I knew it would be a battle. I was already grieving my husband's death, and now I had to face the world alone. But I was determined to raise my child in a safe, loving environment. I didn't want him to be part of the toxic world my brother had created for me. And I told my brother about the pregnancy. I was met with the usual mockery. He made snide remarks about me not knowing what I was getting into. But I didn't care. He had no power over me anymore. I had cut him off, and I was done. But then something changed. 2 weeks ago, my brother reappeared. I didn't invite him into my life, but somehow he found a way to get to me. He began texting me, sending messages full of cruelty and insults. He said things like, "Are you really going to be a single mom? Good luck with that." I deleted his messages, blocked his number, but he didn't stop. He kept reaching out. He kept making my life a living hell. I was at my wit's end when I finally confided in my father-in-law about everything. He was the only one who understood. He was the only one who knew how much pain my brother had caused me over the years. That's when we came up with a plan. Now back to the hospital room. The moment my brother walked in, everything changed. I knew I couldn't just sit there and let him mock me, let him degrade me, let him tear me down like he always had. This time I had a plan. I wasn't going to let him get away with it, not this time. As he stood there oblivious to what was happening, I locked eyes with my father-in-law again. He nodded and I knew the time had come. I let my brother take his pictures, post his captions, laugh about my irresponsible choices, but what he didn't know was that everything he was doing was digging his own grave. I had orchestrated the entire thing, and I was ready for the moment when it all came crashing down. You know, when you're growing up, you don't always see the cracks in the foundation of your family. Sometimes it's only when you're older and you look back that everything starts to make sense. At first, I thought I was just an unlucky kid with a rough sibling, but as I grew older, I began to understand that my brother's cruelty wasn't a coincidence. It was enabled, it was accepted, and worse, it was ignored. I always believed my family was one of those typical American households. Mom, dad, kids, the dog. It was all neat and tidy. On the outside, it looked perfect, like something out of a TV commercial. We had Sunday dinners at the table, we celebrated birthdays, and we went on family vacations that looked idyllic in photos. But behind those polished smiles was a reality no one talked about. Looking back, my brother was always my parents' golden child. I wasn't blind to it, but I didn't know how to name it. There were little things at first, like how my brother would always get the gaming console or the latest model of a phone. It seemed harmless, even kind of cute. He was the eldest, after all. But over time, I began to notice that it wasn't just the toys. It was the way my parents looked at him. It was the way they always defended him when he got in trouble, or the way they swept my complaints under the rug. Remember one night after a big argument, I was sitting in my room feeling like the world was against me? It was around my freshman year of high school. My brother had just made a huge scene at the dinner table. He was mocking me for something I did, some minor mistake that no one would have even remembered, but my brother always found a way to make me feel small. I went to my mom and tried to explain how it felt, how it hurt, but she just brushed me off. "He's just teasing you, you know how brothers are, you can't be so sensitive." I've never forgotten those words. I was looking for someone to stand up for me to help me, but all I got was dismissal. And my father, he was silent as usual. He was always silent when it came to my brother. It wasn't until much later that I realized this wasn't a coincidence either. Favoritism didn't stop at toys and words. It went deeper. I had to learn to deal with it on my own because no one was going to make it right for me. Every achievement of mine seemed to be downplayed in comparison to his. He'd win some sports award and suddenly my good grades didn't matter. I get a compliment from a teacher, but it was barely acknowledged at home. One of the most striking memories I have is of my high school graduation. I had worked so hard to earn that diploma. My mom was so proud, but my brother, in typical fashion, managed to steal the spotlight. When it came time for speeches, he made one of his usual funny jokes about me, about how I was the bookworm who wouldn't last a week without him. The laughter that followed didn't just sting, it burned. My moment, my achievement, was dismissed with the wave of his hand, and my parents. They laughed along. The worst part of it all was that I never had the courage to stand up for myself. Even when I realized how wrong it all was, I didn't speak up. I had learned early on that it wasn't worth the fight. Instead, I built walls between me and the world, and most of those walls were made of silence. As the years went by, I moved out to go to college, but the damage had already been done. I thought that distance would help, and for a while it did, but no matter how far away I went, my brother's shadow always followed me. Last time I saw him before I got married was at a family gathering just a few months before Samuel and I got married. He came into the room, his usual arrogance in tow, and made a joke about how I was probably still single because I was too picky. The way he said it made me feel as small as I had when we were kids. I looked to my parents, but they just smiled and nodded as if this was just how things were supposed to be. That's when I made the decision I had enough, I was done. Fast forward to my wedding day. The joy and excitement were palpable, but there was one thing I couldn't shake: my brother's absence. We had invited him, of course. He was family after all, but something inside of me knew that it wasn't going to be the picture perfect day everyone imagined. My brother showed up not to congratulate me, but to complain. He made remarks about the guest list, about the food, about the music. He tried to pull focus from Samuel and me. I could feel my blood boiling, but this time I stood my ground. I asked him to leave. I told him that if he couldn't be happy for me, then he wasn't welcome. And surprisingly, he left. That moment was the first time I truly stood up for myself. I didn't let him take my happiness away. I didn't let him ruin my day, but it wasn't a happy victory. It was more of a bittersweet realization I had to sever ties with him. I couldn't allow him to continue being a toxic part of my life, especially now that I was starting a family. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder how things might have turned out differently if I had spoken up sooner. If I had confronted him about his behavior, if I had told my parents the truth about the way he treated me. But the reality was that I didn't have that luxury. By the time I realized how much damage had been done, it was too late. The emotional wounds were deep and the trust was broken beyond repair. So when I found out I was pregnant, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't let my brother into my life, not again, not when he had caused me so much pain, and especially not now when I was bringing a child into this world, a world I had fought so hard to protect. But I never could have imagined how far he would go to tear me down. Remember the day I went into labor as if it happened yesterday? It wasn't supposed to be like this: stressful, unpredictable, and filled with moments I wish I could forget. Samuel and I had planned for everything. We'd attended all the prenatal classes, decorated the nursery with soft pastel colors, and chosen the perfect name for our son. It was supposed to be the happiest time of my life, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the looming presence of my brother. Even now, months after my husband's death, my brother's shadow still hung over me like a dark cloud, threatening to rain down on my joy. Told myself it would be different this time. I promised myself that this baby, my son, would not be part of my brother's cruelty. I was done with the toxic patterns from the past. But when you've grown up with someone who constantly makes you feel like you're never enough, it's hard to shake the feeling that they'll always have some kind of power over you. First time I spoke to my brother after I became pregnant was like a slap in the face. He reached out 2 weeks after the news broke, texting me about my big mistake and how I was going to ruin my life being a single mom. I ignored him at first, thinking that maybe if I pretended like nothing had changed, he'd get the hint. But when the messages kept coming, each one more insulting than the last, I realized I couldn't escape him. He wasn't going away. Then the phone call came. My brother had called to check in on me, but I could hear the smirk in his voice. "So, are you going to raise this kid with a bunch of handouts from your husband's family, or are you going to figure out how to do it on your own?" His words felt like venom in my ears. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to scream at him, but I knew that wasn't going to get me anywhere. Instead, I sat with the phone pressed against my ear, barely able to breathe through the frustration and anger boiling inside me. The fact that he had no idea how deeply his words hurt me, that he thought he could still control me like he always had, it was infuriating. But something changed in me that day. I realized that if I didn't take action, if I didn't protect my son from this man, I would be repeating the same mistakes I had made as a child, and I was not going to let that happen. I decided that the moment had arrived. I needed to confront him once and for all, but I knew this couldn't just be a casual conversation. It couldn't be a simple, "Hey, knock it off." This had to be bigger, this had to be dramatic. He needed to feel the consequences of his actions, not just from me, but from the people who would hold him accountable for what he had done. Plan wasn't born out of malice. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about protecting my baby, about making sure my brother would never have the chance to destroy my family the way he had destroyed my peace for years. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed to expose him for what he really was. I couldn't let him keep hiding behind that mask of harmless teasing and family jokes anymore. The real him needed to be seen by everyone. Confided in my father-in-law first. He was the only one who truly understood the years of torment I had endured. He had known Samuel since they served together in the Navy. He knew how much I had struggled with my brother's behavior, how much pain it had caused me, and he knew that now I had a son of my own to protect. The moment we started talking, it was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Finally, someone was listening to me. Finally, someone believed me. "I've got your back," he said. "We'll make sure that your brother doesn't harm you or this baby, but it has to be done carefully. He's unpredictable, and we need to set things up so he can't backpedal when everything goes down." I knew he was right. I couldn't just confront him without a plan, so we began to gather support. I contacted my friends, my husband's family, and even my brother's wife. I needed witnesses, people who could back up everything that was about to unfold. I wasn't going to let my brother make me look like the crazy one. He wasn't going to twist the narrative this time. In the week leading up to my delivery, I quietly coordinated with everyone. I arranged for certain people to be in place when my brother arrived at the hospital. I spoke to the nurses, the staff, and the security team about making sure no one would be able to get in without permission, and I waited. When the day arrived, everything was set. I had already been admitted to the hospital and I was feeling nervous, but I knew what I had to do. The pain of labor was sharp, but it felt almost distant compared to the anticipation of the confrontation I was about to face. My body ached, but my heart was resolute. I wasn't going to let this moment pass me by. My brother texted me that morning saying he was on his way. He didn't even bother asking if I was okay or if I needed anything. No, his message was just another taunt. "Hope you're ready for the circus that is your life now." I stared at my phone screen, my blood boiling. How dare he? I looked at the bassinet beside me, the small, fragile life that was so perfect and innocent. This child, my son, deserved so much more than the pain I had been subjected to. He deserved a world free from my brother's cruelty, free from the toxicity of the past, and I was going to give it to him. My brother arrived shortly after, strutting into the room like it was his domain. He had that cocky smile on his face, the one I had grown to hate. He didn't even acknowledge the fact that I had just given birth. Instead, he immediately started making comments about my scar from the C-section. "Did you think this was going to be easy?" he sneered. "Looks like you're paying for your bad decisions already." I wanted to scream, I wanted to throw something at him, anything to make him stop, but instead I stayed silent, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't about me anymore, this was about my son. I locked eyes with my father-in-law, who had been standing just behind my brother, waiting for the right moment. He gave me a subtle nod, and I knew it was time. The room was suddenly filled with the sound of my father-in-law's voice, steady and commanding. Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing here? My brother froze. He had no idea what was happening, no idea that I had planned every move, every word. My father-in-law stepped forward, his eyes cold with fury. You need to leave, he said, his voice unwavering. You've done enough. My brother turned around, probably expecting to see a nurse or a doctor, but instead he saw something that made his face pale. Behind him, there was a small group of people who had gathered at my request. My husband's family, my friends, and most importantly, my brother's wife. Brother turned slowly, his expression shifting from the usual smug arrogance to confusion. He stared at the group of people standing in the doorway. They weren't just anyone, they were witnesses, each one a part of the web I had woven to catch him in his own lies. His eyes darted from face to face, each one more familiar than the last, until his gaze landed on the intern he had been having an affair with. She was standing there, her arms folded, her gaze unwavering. I watched his face change. The color drained from his cheeks, and I knew in that moment he realized this wasn't just a family gathering. This was something else. This was the reckoning he had unknowingly walked right into. What the hell is going on? He stammered, looking back at me, his confidence faltering for the first time I could remember. But I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes locked on him, waiting for him to fully understand. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but it wasn't for me anymore. This was about my son. This was about protecting him from the same venomous words and actions my brother had spewed at me my whole life. What's so funny? He sneered again, as if trying to regain control of the situation. This some kind of joke to you? I'm just here to see my nephew, not for a family circus. Enough, my father-in-law interjected, stepping forward into the space that had once been dominated by my brother's presence. You need to leave. You're not welcome here, and you're certainly not going to make a mockery of this family. My brother's face reddened, his arrogance twisting into anger. He opened his mouth to protest, but then he froze. Behind him, the door swung open. It was my father. And then my mother, looking just as surprised as my brother, but with something else in her eyes. Regret, maybe? Shame? She looked at my brother and then back at me, her eyes searching for some kind of explanation, some kind of understanding. But there was none to be found. Standing in the doorway, my father's voice was steady, but the weight of it was unmistakable. I think it's time you knew the truth about what's been happening, he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. And then he did something that in that moment felt like the biggest betrayal of all. He stepped aside. Behind him stood my brother's boss, a man who had always been nothing but formal and professional, but today his expression was far from neutral. And standing beside him was the family lawyer. The final piece fell into place, and my brother's face twisted into one of confusion, then realization, then something darker. And then, as if the weight of everything was too much for him, it happened. My brother turned toward me, his eyes blazing with fury, and for the first time I saw the true hatred in his gaze, the kind of look that made my stomach drop. You did this, didn't you? He hissed, his voice low, full of venom. You think you've won, you think you're better than me. Before I could respond, before anyone could intervene, my brother lunged at me. It happened so fast, my mind didn't have time to process the sheer violence of it. One moment he was standing there, shouting his accusations, and the next his hand was outstretched toward me, the wild anger in his eyes blinding him to everything else in the room. But what he didn't expect was what happened next. My father-in-law's reaction was faster than I ever could have anticipated. His hand shot out, grabbing my brother's wrist with a strength that made him stumble back. My brother's eyes widened in shock. He had never seen his father-in-law move like this before, and for the first time, he was at a loss. But the damage wasn't done. Before anyone could stop him, my brother swung his other arm wildly, his elbow connecting with my stomach, right where the incision from my C-section was still healing. The sharp pain that shot through me took my breath away. I gasped, clutching my abdomen, the searing agony almost too much to bear. And that's when everything shifted. The nurse, who had been in the room the entire time, reacted immediately. The moment my brother made contact, she slammed her hand down on the emergency red button near the bed. The sound of it echoing in the sterile, quiet room was deafening. Within seconds, security burst through the door and everything went into chaos. But even as the security guards wrestled my brother to the floor, even as they began to shout commands, the room felt oddly still. The world had gone quiet for a brief moment. My focus was entirely on the pain in my stomach, the feeling that I might crumble under the weight of it, but there was something else, something far worse, that kept pushing into my mind. My baby, where was he? The security guards worked quickly, pinning my brother down, his threats to kill me and my son still spilling from his lips as he struggled. His face turned purple, veins popping in his neck as he yelled at me, his words full of rage and venom. I'll make sure you pay for this, he screamed, thrashing against the men holding him down. You and your damn baby, you'll regret this. But none of it mattered anymore. As one of the security guards radioed for backup, I locked eyes with my father-in-law. He didn't look at my brother, he didn't even flinch at the chaos. His eyes were focused on me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a tiny sliver of safety. I heard the door open again, and I turned my head, expecting to see another nurse, maybe a doctor, but instead I saw the man who would change everything. Banks, the head of hospital security, stepped into the room. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the frenzy happening all around us. He took one look at my brother and raised a hand. Everyone out, he commanded, except for medical staff. My parents, the lawyer, and even my brother's boss were ushered out of the room with barely a protest. My father didn't argue, though I saw the guilt in his eyes as he glanced at me one last time before he left. My mother, on the other hand, stood in the doorway for a moment as if she were unsure what to do before being ushered out. And then the most terrifying words of all came next. Miss, said his voice soft but firm, we need to take your baby for a safety check. The blood drained from my face. Please no, I whispered, but the nurse was already there, gently taking my baby's bassinet, her hands steady, her eyes kind. She mouthed something to me that I couldn't quite make out, but her expression was all I needed to see. He'll be fine, she whispered before leaving the room. I barely had time to process what was happening before it turned back to me. He looked at my stomach, then back into my eyes. You've been assaulted, he said, his voice steady, even as the panic began to creep into my chest. We need to document this for the police. I nodded, too shaken to respond. The sharp pain in my abdomen was still there, but it seemed so insignificant compared to the fear that gripped me now. Everything was spiraling, everything had gone from bad to worse. And yet in the back of my mind, I knew this was the end. Don't remember much about the few minutes after I took my baby from the room. My world seemed to narrow down to the sharp, burning pain in my stomach and the haunting thought that I had just witnessed my brother try to destroy everything I had built. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the realization that despite everything I had done to protect my son, I couldn't shake the terror that had taken root in my heart. Was he safe? Could hear the distant hum of hospital machines, the soft beating of a monitor in the corner, but all I could focus on was the empty bassinet beside my bed. The silence felt suffocating, and I couldn't help but feel like I was suffocating with it. I wasn't even sure how long it had been since left with my baby, but it felt like an eternity. I just wanted him back. I just wanted to hold him, to feel him close, to know that he was okay. My mind kept replaying the moment when my brother had shoved his elbow into my stomach. The pain had been sharp and immediate, but there was a deeper pain that I couldn't put into words. It was a feeling of betrayal, of knowing that my brother, the one who had tormented me for years, had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Before I could spiral any further, the door creaked open. A familiar face entered the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of relief. It was Dr. Caldwell, the OB-GYN who had been overseeing my care since I was admitted. She had been with me through every step of this journey, and even though her presence didn't immediately erase the fear I felt, it gave me something to hold on to. How are you feeling? She asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. I didn't answer right away. The question seemed too broad, too loaded. Instead, I just stared at her, hoping that she could somehow make everything better, even though I knew she couldn't. I'm scared, I finally managed to say, my voice cracking. She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. It's completely understandable, you've been through a lot today. She stepped closer to the bed, and I could see the professional detachment in her demeanor, but I also saw something else, compassion. But I need to check on you, and we need to make sure you're healing properly. I nodded silently, wincing as she gently examined my abdomen. The pain in my incision from the C-section was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Every time I felt the sharp twinge in my stomach, it reminded me of what my brother had done and what could have happened if things had gone differently. Dr. Caldwell's face grew serious as she checked my incision. It looks like the stitches have pulled in a few places, she said, her voice calm but firm. We're going to need to clean the area and redress it to prevent any infection. You're going to be sore for a while longer, but it's important we take care of this right now. She instructed one of the nurses to bring a sterile kit, and I could feel the tension in the room building again. The reality of the situation was sinking in deeper with each passing second. My brother had crossed a line, and I knew that things would never go back to the way they were. My body wasn't just healing from the trauma of childbirth, it was now healing from the violence he had inflicted on me. I closed my eyes for a moment as Dr. Caldwell worked, her hands gentle but efficient. I had no control over my body at that moment. I couldn't stop the pain, couldn't erase the fear. But what I could do, what I needed to do, was to make sure that my son didn't grow up in a world where people like my brother had the power to tear families apart. I don't know how long it was before I came back into the room, but when she did, she wasn't alone. She had a small team of nurses with her, each of them taking a quiet moment to check my vitals, my pain levels, and make sure I was physically stable, but none of them could look me in the eye the way I did. When she approached my bed, she gave me a soft smile, but her eyes told a different story. There was no hiding the concern there. I've got him, she said gently. Your son is in the nursery, and I just finished making sure he's okay. He's a healthy little guy. I exhaled the breath I didn't realize I had been holding, feeling the tightness in my chest loosen just a little, but it wasn't enough. I needed to hold him. I needed to make sure he was okay for myself. Can I see him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nodded, her smile warmer now. Just give me a second, I'll bring him back in here for you. She left, the room fell back into its previous stillness. The silence pressed in on me again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was the quiet before the storm. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let my brother get away with this, not this time. A few minutes later returned, wheeling the bassinet with my son back into the room. He was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with each soft breath, looking so peaceful that it made my heart ache. Set the bassinet beside my bed and helped me sit up, adjusting my pillows so I could hold him. My arms shook slightly as I reached for him, but when I finally cradled him against my chest, all the tension in my body seemed to melt away. My baby, my beautiful perfect son. I held him close, breathing in his sweet scent, the faint fragrance of baby lotion mixed with the sterile hospital air. It was the only thing that felt real in that moment. His small hand wrapped around my finger, and I finally allowed myself to feel something other than fear. I'm sorry, I whispered to him. I'm so sorry you have to grow up in a world where people like that exist, but I will protect you, I will always protect you. And that's when I realized that no matter what happened from this point forward, no matter how ugly or painful it got, I would fight to keep my son safe. I would never let him face the same kind of darkness that my brother had brought into my life. I had a new purpose now, and nothing would take that away from me. The days that followed were a blur of hospital rooms, legal paperwork, and endless waiting. My brother was taken away that day, his face still twisted with rage as he was hauled off in handcuffs, but the feeling of relief was short-lived. Every moment without him near me brought a fleeting sense of peace, but I knew it wouldn't last, it never did. The legal process had already begun, and my brother was being held for psychiatric evaluation. I couldn't tell if he was playing the victim or if he truly believed that everything he had done to me over the years was justified. Either way, the damage was done. His threats, the assault, the years of emotional manipulation, it had all come to head. I remember sitting in the sterile room, the lights dimmed slightly to make the space feel less cold, as Detective Mendoza, the officer in charge of the case, sat across from me. Her voice was calm and professional, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She'd been with me through every step of the investigation, and I knew I could trust her. We've documented everything, she said, her pen moving swiftly across the legal pad. The security footage from the hospital has been secured, and we have witness statements from the staff, your family, and others who were there. I nodded, my mind still racing with everything that had transpired. And my brother? I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. He's been placed under psychiatric hold, Mendoza replied, her tone serious. But we're moving forward with charges. Assault, criminal threatening, violation of hospital conduct. We're also working on the restraining order. The words echoed in my mind. My brother would face consequences. It was happening, finally. But even as the words settled, another part of me began to question everything. Could I really go through with this? Could I live with the knowledge that my family, my mother, my father would never look at me the same way again? The guilt was starting to gnaw at me. I had cut my brother out of my life, but I had also cut out my mother's love, my father's support. It wasn't just him who had been removed from the family. It was me too. I wasn't prepared for what came next. It was the middle of the night when my phone buzzed, breaking the silence of the sterile hospital room. I had barely slept, my mind a constant whirlwind of thoughts, but the sudden ringing of my phone pulled me from the haze. The name on the screen made my stomach drop, Mom. I hesitated for a moment before answering, knowing that whatever she had to say wouldn't make anything easier. Hello, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Why? Her voice cracked as if she had been crying. Why would you do this to your brother, to the family? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. You don't know what he did, Mom, I said, my voice quiet but firm. He tried to hurt me, he threatened my baby. But her response was sharp, defensive. He didn't mean it, he's been under so much stress with everything going on in his life. You know how hard things have been for him. This isn't him, he's your brother, he's family. I felt my pulse quicken as her words landed with a sickening weight. Family? That word had always held so much meaning, but now it felt like a trap, a chain that bound me to a past I couldn't escape. Mom, I said, forcing the words out, you've always defended him, always made excuses for him, but this time I can't protect him anymore, not after everything he's done. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. I couldn't breathe. The anxiety and guilt pressed against my chest like an unrelenting weight. I'm not asking you to choose, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, but you've torn this family apart. How could you do this to your own brother, your own blood? Her words were a slap in the face, but worse, they were the same words I had heard all my life when it came to him. He was always the victim, he was always the one who got the benefit of the doubt, and now I was the one who had to bear the consequences. Couldn't breathe, you're right, I said, my voice cracking. I've torn the family apart, but maybe that's what needed to happen, maybe the truth had to come out. I could hear her soft sobs through the phone, the hurt and betrayal in her voice cutting through me like a knife. I can't believe this, you don't understand, your brother needs help, he's been struggling for years, and you're just going to let him go, let him lose everything. My heart was breaking, I wanted to tell her I understood, I wanted to tell her I still loved her, but I couldn't go back to the way things were. The guilt weighed heavily on me, but the truth was that I had to protect my son, I had to protect myself, and I had to stop the cycle that had held me captive for so long. I'm sorry, Mom, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but I can't be a part of this anymore. The line went silent, and I knew that I had just severed the last thread holding me to my family. The door to my room opened again, this time with a soft knock. I looked up to see a familiar face, Detective Mendoza. She stepped in quietly, her presence a small comfort in the chaos that had consumed me. I just wanted to check in with you, she said gently, sitting at the edge of the bed. I know this isn't easy, but I need to ask, are you okay? I shook my head slowly. I don't know, I feel like I'm losing everything, my family, my brother, everything, and for what? You're doing the right thing, she said, her voice steady. Your brother's behavior wasn't just a one-time thing, he's had years of this kind of behavior and it's gotten worse. What you're doing now, setting boundaries, protecting yourself and your child, is what matters most. You can't let his past actions define you anymore. I closed my eyes, feeling the tears threaten to spill. I had to remind myself why I was doing this. I had to remind myself that I wasn't doing this for revenge. I wasn't doing this to hurt my brother, I was doing it for my son, for the family I was building, the life I was trying to protect. I'm just scared, I whispered. I'm scared that everything I've done will just fall apart, that I'll lose everything I've fought for. Detective Mendoza gave me a small smile. You haven't lost anything yet, you're just learning to stand up for what's yours. And for the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe her. The following days blurred together in a haze of paperwork, legal proceedings, and hospital visits. I kept my distance from my mother, my father, and the rest of my family. The divide between us had grown so wide, it seemed like there was no way to bridge it anymore. But more than that, I kept my focus where it needed to be, on my son. The first few nights at home were a quiet kind of chaos. The baby had only just started to sleep for longer stretches, and I'd learned to navigate life as a new mother with one hand while keeping an eye on everything that had fallen apart around me with the other. My father-in-law, Eversteady, stayed with me for a while, helping set up the security systems he had promised and constantly checking in. He even rearranged my kitchen, putting in place locks on cabinets I hadn't realized needed them, leaving me a feeling of peace I hadn't known before. I didn't have a chance to feel comfortable for long, though. Days after I returned home from the hospital, I received an email from my lawyer. It was about my brother's case. He had pled guilty to the charges of assault and criminal threatening, but the plea deal was still something I had to decide on. The prosecutors had offered probation, mandatory counseling, anger management sessions, community service, and an ankle monitor. It sounded like a slap on the wrist. But in a way, it was what I had asked for. I didn't want to see my brother rot in prison, but I didn't want him to get off scot-free either. He needed to understand the gravity of what he had done, and this plea deal was supposed to ensure that. Still, the decision weighed on me. I was torn between the voice inside my head telling me to fight for more, to make sure my brother truly paid for what he had done, and the part of me that just wanted peace, closure. In the end, I knew what I had to do. The plea deal was the best option for my son, for me, for my family's future. I signed the papers, and the court hearing was scheduled for the following week. My brother, now under house arrest and monitored by a probation officer, wouldn't be allowed near me or my son. The words written in black and white seemed final, but even then, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Could feel the weight of the decision pressing on me, but I also knew I had made the right choice. My brother had tried to destroy me. He had tried to destroy the one thing that mattered more than anything else in the world, my baby. But now I was doing something I had never been able to do before. I was standing up for myself, and in doing that, I was standing up for my son. Next few weeks were a whirlwind of therapy appointments, police interviews, and the slow, painful process of healing. I had finally agreed to seek professional help even though I had resisted it for so long. My therapist, Dr. Hall, was kind but firm, and she never allowed me to avoid confronting the truth of what I had gone through. The trauma of my childhood, the betrayal of my brother, the abuse I had suffered at his hands, and the guilt I had carried for years. But with every session, with every word I spoke, I felt lighter, a little less burdened, a little closer to finding peace. Your brother's actions were not your fault, Dr. Hall reminded me gently week after week. You're not responsible for his behavior, but you are responsible for your healing, for your son's safety, and you have done everything in your power to ensure he's protected. The words resonated in me, and I started to believe them. It wasn't my fault. I had done what I needed to do. I had broken free from the toxic cycle. But the most profound realization came during one of our sessions, when Dr. Hall asked me a question I had never truly considered. Do you think you're ready to forgive your brother? The question hung in the air, suspended between us. I had been expecting a lot of things, questions about my past, about my pain, about how to cope with everything, but this was different. Forgiveness, after everything he had done, after the years of torment, after trying to harm my baby, the idea of forgiveness felt impossible, almost absurd. I don't know, I answered honestly, shaking my head. I don't think I ever will, how could I? Dr. Hall nodded, her expression thoughtful. Forgiveness isn't always about letting someone back into your life. It's about letting go of the hold they have over you. You don't have to forgive him for his sake, you do it for your sake, for your peace. That was the moment everything shifted. I didn't have to forgive him, I didn't have to make it okay because it never would be, but I could forgive myself. I could release the guilt, the anger, and the sense of responsibility I had carried for so long. And as I sat in the warmth of that realization, I knew that I was finally free. Final peace came when my brother, in one of his few remaining attempts to manipulate the situation, tried to reach out. His lawyer had sent a message asking if we could discuss things. I stared at the text for a long time, my finger hovering over the block button. Part of me wanted to hear him grovel to make him face the consequences of his actions. Another part of me wanted to hear his apology to see if there was any hint of remorse. But I couldn't give him that power. I blocked the number without a second thought. The weeks turned into months. My son grew stronger, more vibrant every day. I looked at him and saw not just the future, but the possibility of something better, a life free from the toxicity that had plagued my childhood. I held him close every night, whispering promises of protection, of safety, of love. And one day, when I was sitting in the park with him, watching him play in the soft grass, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a long time: peace, real peace. The storm had passed, my brother was out of my life, my family, broken as it was, had a chance to heal, but most importantly, I had broken free. I had protected my son, I had protected myself. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. As I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I ask myself one question: was it worth it? Every step, every moment of fear, every confrontation, was it all worth it? What do you think? Can you ever really forgive someone who's hurt you so deeply, even when it's for your own peace? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found strength in this story, if you've been through your own battles, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about resilience, courage, and starting over.